Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're diving into Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads by David Rundell. And it's about a lot more than just the history of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yeah.
It's really about how the Al Saud dynasty,
Yeah.
built an empire from basically nothing, and that delicate balancing act that they have to maintain between oil, religion, and power.
Yeah.
And the big question is whether their Vision 2030 plan is a real path forward or just a mirage.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. This book is really trying to help us understand how Saudi Arabia got to where it is today and where it might be going in the future. One of the things that's so fascinating about this book is Rundell doesn't just lay out the facts. He really explores the underlying currents, the tensions, the almost Shakespearean drama of this dynasty, its rise and its struggle to adapt in a really rapidly changing world.
So let's rewind back to the beginning. Rundell takes us all the way back to the 18th century. And what struck me is how this whole story really starts with, it's almost like a pact or a deal with the devil between Mohammed bin Saud, this ambitious tribal leader, and Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab, this really fiery religious reformer.
Yeah, that's right. It's really this fusion of political ambition and religious zeal that fuels the creation of the first Saudi state. And it's interesting how Rundell shows how this alliance, which is forged in the harshness of the desert, really sets the stage for everything that follows. It establishes this really intertwined relationship between the rulers and the Wahhabi religious establishment that has been absolutely crucial to the Al Saud survival.
But that first Saudi state doesn't last. They end up butting heads with the Ottomans, and boom, it all comes crashing down. You'd think that's game over, right?
Yeah, you would think so. But that's where the story gets really interesting. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and enter Abdulaziz bin Saud. This is a figure who practically leaps off the pages of this book. Imagine this. A young man driven from his ancestral home who recaptures Riyadh in this incredibly daring night raid with just 40 men. It's like a scene straight out of a Hollywood action film. This guy is clearly not your average ruler.
Okay, so Abdulaziz is bold. He's ambitious.
Yeah.
But how does he go from retaking one city to forging an entire kingdom?
That's where the Ikhwan come in. These are warriors, fueled by this incredibly fervent, almost puritanical interpretation of Islam. They're fiercely loyal to Abdulaziz, and they really become his sword, helping him conquer vast swaths of territory. But, and this is a really key point, they're not just mindless fanatics. Rundell shows how Abdulaziz masterfully used their religious zeal while also keeping their more extreme tendencies in check. It's a real high-wire act. But he managed to pull it off, eventually unifying the various regions that become modern-day Saudi Arabia in 1932.
So you're saying Abdulaziz wasn't just a conqueror, he was also a master strategist, a politician who knew how to leverage all these different forces, even ones that were conflicting, to achieve his goals.
Exactly. And what's even more impressive is how he managed to balance the Ikhwan's religious fervor with the need for stability and order in this newly unified kingdom. He knew he couldn't let their impulses undermine his authority or alienate these key tribes.
It sounds like he's constantly walking a tightrope between these competing forces. But then in 1938, everything changes. Oil is discovered. It's like the whole kingdom just hit the jackpot.
It's not just a jackpot, it's a seismic shift. Overnight, Saudi Arabia transforms from this poor desert kingdom to a global powerhouse. The oil wealth is absolutely staggering, and it brings a whole new set of challenges for the Al Saud. Now they're not just managing tribes and religious factions, they're navigating the complexities of global economics, international relations, and this pressure to modernize while also preserving their traditional power structure.
It's like suddenly being handed the keys to a Ferrari when you're used to riding a camel. Talk about an adjustment. Rundell really emphasizes how this oil wealth becomes both a blessing and a curse for the Al Saud. On the one hand, it gives them the resources to secure their power and develop the country. But on the other hand, it creates a whole new set of expectations and challenges, both domestically and internationally.
You're absolutely right. Now the Al Saud are juggling multiple balls in the air. They have to appease the conservative religious establishment, who view some aspects of modernization with suspicion. They have to manage the expectations of the increasingly wealthy merchant class, and they still have to maintain their ties to those powerful tribal leaders who are crucial to their legitimacy.
It seems like an impossible balancing act. How do they even begin to manage all these competing interests?
Well, Rundell points to a few key strategies that the Al Saud have employed over the years. One is patronage. They use their vast oil wealth to fund religious institutions, social programs, and infrastructure projects. This helps to keep the population content and reduce the potential for dissent.
It's like buying loyalty. But on a massive scale?
In a way, yes. But it's not just about throwing money at the problem. The Al Saud are also masters of strategic alliances. They carefully cultivate relationships with key tribes, appointing their leaders to government positions, and ensuring that they have a stake in the system.
So it's a mix of carrots and sticks. Reward your allies, keep your opponents close, and always make sure you're holding the reins of power.
That's a pretty good summary of their approach. And this balancing act, this constant negotiation between these competing forces, becomes a defining feature of Saudi politics, both domestically and internationally.
Okay, so we've got this foundation of religious legitimacy, oil wealth, and a very shrewd understanding of how to maintain power. But what happens when the guy who built this whole system, Abdulaziz, is gone? How do you ensure a smooth transition of power, especially in a system where family ties are so central?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. Rundell dives into the issue of succession within the Al Saud dynasty, and it's a story filled with intrigue, power struggles,
Right.
and the ever-present threat of instability.
That's where we'll pick it up next time, right? The fight for the throne, and how this seemingly unshakable dynasty deals with the challenges of passing on power.
Absolutely. Buckle up, because the story of the Al Saud is about to get even more intense.
So we left off with this whole question of succession. You've got this incredibly powerful dynasty built on this foundation of religious legitimacy, oil wealth, and really savvy political maneuvering. But how do you ensure that that power passes smoothly from one generation to the next without tearing the whole system apart?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question for any dynasty, especially one as complex as the Al Saud. And Rundell takes us through some pretty turbulent periods, like the reign of King Saud, who, despite being Abdulaziz's son, really struggled to kind of handle the kingdom's finances. And he ended up being forced to abdicate.
That's got to be a blow to the family's image. I mean, their founder, Abdulaziz, seemed practically invincible, but then his own son can't handle the pressure.
It is. It's a real reminder that even the most powerful dynasties are vulnerable to human fallibility and internal divisions. But what's interesting is how the Al Saud managed to navigate these crises without the whole system imploding. They end up replacing Saud with his brother, King Faisal, a much more astute and capable leader.
Okay, so they course correct, but is it just a matter of finding the best man for the job each time? Or is there a deeper system at play here?
That's where Rundell's analysis gets really fascinating. He introduces us to this group called the Suderi Seven. These were 7 full brothers, all sons of Abdulaziz and his favorite wife, Hafsa bint Ahmad al-Suderi. And let me tell you, these brothers were a force to be reckoned with.
So we're talking about like a power block within the already powerful royal family.
Precisely. Rundell argues that the Suderi Seven really understood the importance of unity and strategic alliances. They supported each other's rise to power, making sure that their branch of the family remained dominant, and you see their influence play out in the succession of King Khalid, followed by Fahd Abdullah, and ultimately Salman, the current king, all Suderi Seven.
Wow, it's like a dynasty within a dynasty. But didn't this concentration of power create resentment among other branches of the family? I mean, talk about sibling rivalry on a whole other level.
Absolutely. It's definitely a recipe for tension and potential conflict.
Sure.
And Rundell doesn't shy away from exploring these internal power dynamics and how they shape the course of Saudi politics.
So we got oil, religion, and now family feuds. It's like a real-life soap opera with global implications. But then things take an even darker turn. Rundell talks about the rise of Islamic extremism and how al-Qaeda emerges as a threat to the kingdom itself.
Yeah, this is where the book takes on a whole new level of urgency. You have to remember, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam, home to its holiest sites. And here you have this group, al-Qaeda, claiming to represent true Islam, while simultaneously attacking the very heart of the kingdom. It's a direct challenge, not just to the Al Saud's political authority, but to their religious legitimacy as well.
And those attacks, especially the ones on the residential compounds in Riyadh in 2003, were absolutely horrific. Rundell really drives home the sense of shock and vulnerability that gripped the kingdom after those attacks.
These are a real turning point for the Al Saud. They realize that they're not immune to the forces of extremism, even within their own borders. And Rundell does a great job of laying out their multi-pronged response.
Okay, so how do they fight back against a group like al-Qaeda? We're not just talking about military force here, right? This is about ideology, winning hearts and minds.
You're right, it's much more complex than just a military campaign. The Al Saud cracked down on terror financing. They shut down suspect charities. And they even mobilized the religious establishment. to publicly denounce al-Qaeda's ideology. They understand that to defeat an enemy like this, you need to delegitimize their message, undermine their support base.
That makes sense. But what about the people who are already radicalized, the ones who have already carried out attacks? Rundell mentions this controversial rehabilitation program for captured militants, trying to reintegrate former terrorists back into society. I mean, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
And maybe even a risky one.
It is. And it's really a testament to the complexity of the counterterrorism challenge. You have to remember, the Saudi government is trying to strike this delicate balance. They want to be tough on terrorism, but they also don't want to create more martyrs or fuel further resentment. This rehabilitation program, as Rundell describes it, is an attempt to address the underlying causes of extremism and offer a path back for those who have strayed.
So it's like a carrot and stick approach again. But this time it's applied to counterterrorism. It's fascinating how these themes keep recurring throughout the book. But I have to ask, did it work?
Well, that's a question that's still debated today. Rundell acknowledges both the successes and the criticisms of the program, highlighting the ethical dilemmas involved and the difficulty of measuring its long-term impact.
It's a reminder that there are no easy answers when it comes to dealing with something as complex as terrorism, especially in a region as volatile as the Middle East. But now, let's fast forward to the present day. King Salman takes the throne in 2015, and he inherits a kingdom facing a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, this is where Rundell brings us to the current crossroads, the moment where the future of Saudi Arabia feels very much up in the air. King Salman is facing a volatile regional landscape, economic instability due to fluctuating oil prices, and a burgeoning youth population with very high expectations, and a growing impatience for change.
So it sounds like King Salman is facing like a perfect storm of challenges. You've got regional instability, economic uncertainty, and then this young generation that's increasingly connected to the world and really hungry for change. It's a lot for any leader to handle, let alone one who's already in his 80s when he takes the throne.
Yeah, and that's where his son, Mohammed bin Salman, often referred to as MBS, enters the picture. He kind of bursts onto the scene with this really ambitious plan called Vision 2030. It's all about transforming Saudi Arabia, diversifying the economy away from oil, creating jobs, and modernizing society. It's bold, it's sweeping, and some would even say it's almost revolutionary in its scope.
Okay, but we've seen leaders try to shake things up before, and it doesn't always go smoothly. What makes MBS's approach any different? I mean, is Vision 2030 just a flashy PR campaign, or is there really substance behind it?
That's the question that Rundell is really grappling with. Throughout the latter part of the book, he acknowledges that Vision 2030 is incredibly ambitious. It's like trying to turn this giant oil tanker in a really narrow channel. You know there are going to be bumps along the way, maybe even some major collisions.
So what are some of the biggest obstacles in their path? I mean, we're talking about changing the very fabric of Saudi society and its economy. That can't be easy.
Well, one of the biggest challenges is inertia. Saudi Arabia has been so reliant on oil for so long that breaking free from that dependence is a monumental task. It requires massive investment in new industries, education, and infrastructure. It also means challenging powerful vested interests who benefit from the status quo. Rundell actually gives a really good example of this. He talks about trying to get young Saudis to take jobs in the private sector. When they're used to these cushy government jobs, it's a cultural shift as much as an economic one.
It's interesting because you mentioned earlier how the Al Saud have used patronage to maintain stability. But now it sounds like that same system of patronage could become a roadblock to the very changes they're trying to implement.
Yeah, that's exactly the paradox that Rundell highlights. The things that have helped the Al Saud survive for so long might now be hindering their ability to adapt and thrive in the 21st century.
They're kind of trying to dismantle the very system that brought them to power. That's got to create some tension within the royal family and among the elites.
You're right. And Rundell doesn't shy away from the potential for internal conflict. He points to the 2017 anti-corruption purge, where dozens of princes and businessmen were detained as evidence of MBS consolidating power and potentially silencing dissent.
Yeah, that purge made headlines all over the world. Some people saw it as this bold move against corruption. Others saw it as a ruthless power grab. Where does Rundell land on that?
I think he does a good job of presenting both sides of the argument. He acknowledges the need to tackle corruption, but he also raises concerns about due process and the potential for this kind of crackdown to backfire. The Al Saud have always relied on this delicate balance of power. If MBS upsets that balance too dramatically, it could destabilize the whole system.
So there's a lot of risk involved in this Vision 2030. But what about the potential rewards? What could a successful transformation look like for Saudi Arabia?
Well, Rundell kind of paints this picture of a more modern, diversified economy, less reliant on oil, with a more vibrant and engaged society. He points to the lifting of the ban on women driving as a really symbolic victory and a sign of real progress on social reforms. He also talks about the push to develop entertainment and tourism, creating opportunities for young Saudis, and really opening up the kingdom to the world.
That's interesting because for so long, Saudi Arabia has been seen as this closed-off, almost mysterious place. If Vision 2030 succeeds, it could change not just the country itself, but its image on the global stage.
Exactly. It's about rebranding Saudi Arabia for the 21st century. But as Rundell reminds us, change doesn't happen overnight. There will be pushback from those who benefit from the old ways, and there's always the risk of unforeseen consequences.
So ultimately, Rundle leaves us with more questions than answers. Vision or mirage? I guess we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out.
Yeah, he does. And I think that's the mark of a good book. It challenges us to think critically, to grapple with complexity, and to acknowledge that there are no easy solutions. When it comes to something as multifaceted as the future of Saudi Arabia, it's a story that's still being written.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of Saudi Arabia. Thanks for guiding us through all the twists and turns of this incredible story.
My pleasure. And for all of you listening out there, I definitely encourage you to check out Rundell's book. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the forces shaping this pivotal region and the challenges and opportunities facing one of the world's most influential kingdoms.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.